Hey
Well,
folks, I'm going to welcome you. I'm Kimberly Dark. It's good to see you in here for the Hope Desk. I want to just acknowledge that hey, if these topics looked familiar to you when you saw them come by, it's because they were the same topics from last month. We had technical difficulties. I was trying to come to you from the San Francisco State campus where I was working that day, and it didn't work. I tried and tried and tried. And, Emily was like, hey, this is the first time in over a year that there's been technical difficulties. It's not so bad. And I'm like, but it's bad. I didn't give up on you until like 23 minutes after the hour. I just want you to know I tried and tried. So we're back with these same topics. So hey, listen, what are we doing here? The Hope Desk came about because of people's questions regarding difficult social issues, particularly in the summer of 2020. And like, how do we talk about all of these um, white supremacy in our nation, about economic inequalities. And, I have a sociological perspective on some of these things. I don't have all the answers. I don't have the only right answers, but I am spending this time each month with you all to try and offer you some perspectives because it is hopeful if more of us are able to enter public discourse in a civil fashion about things that are difficult to discuss. So that's what we're here to do. And yeah, these topics come from you all. And so the topics that I'm handling today, one of them is, how is animal cruelty relevant in discussing diet culture, or is it even relevant? So this is something that came up in one of the online discussions that I participate in. And I thought, yeah, this is a good thing to handle in the Hope Desk. So listen, it's a brilliant thing that more and more people are challenging diet culture and the idea that everybody should be on a diet, that being thinner is better than being fatter, that the body's size is like the biggest relevant health indicator we have in our culture. All of that was constructed in order to make profit for what is broadly known as the diet industry. And all of that stuff has become so normalized in our culture that we just sort of roll with it. So here's the deal. There is so much that is also intertwined with diet culture. So certainly things like the quality of food, like what kind of foods are you eating? What kind of food is available to you in a free market factory farming sort of environment. Also, what kind of labor practices are involved in creating the food that we consume, and what kind of stereotypes are out there with regard to people who are impoverished versus people with wealth and what they can afford to eat, and people of color versus what is considered like white American standard fare. I mean, all of these things come up in our conversations about diet culture. Now, to my mind, that's a good thing because there are intersectional issues that we can't handle without talking about adjacent issues. And I definitely think that animal cruelty is one of those diet culture adjacent issues that sometimes we are going to have to discuss in order to have a robust conversation about ending diet culture. Now, let me just acknowledge, there are also times when you might want to separate related issues. We don't need to deal with intersections all the time, but particularly in this era of not just eating disorders like anorexia or bulimia, but also orthorexia, where people are kind of obsessed with pursuing their own health and what that means to eat something that might be grown or cultivated in a certain way. Um, Also, the pull toward environmental decisions in our diet. Yeah, all of this stuff is leading us to a more holistic focus on food and eating and our place in things as animals, right? Like that's that's important too. Um, so I'm going to keep talking here for a moment, but I just want you to be cultivating your questions if you have them about what I'm saying. And also, Emily's going to give you a link in a little while about, an article that I'm going to mention to you. But so, hey, we're talking about food and not just what we consume, but also how the food industry operates. And this means that both environmentalism and animal cruelty have a place in the conversation. So, in discussing body policing or appearance policing, in which diet culture seeks to validate conformity of appearance, right? Because that's what's driving us to participate in diet culture, is that we want to have socially conforming appearance, often in the name of good physical and mental health, of course, but really what we want is appearance. And I'm saying really because studies have shown again and again that when people are asked, like, why did you do this diet? Why did you do this bariatric surgery? The answers are not, health is like maybe on the surface, but you scratch it and appearance is just right there. Right there is the main thing we're talking about. So, because all these things are related, we are by necessity discussing racism and classism. And because of how the US constructed racism in order to justify those many, many years of slavery, be clear here, we justified that by saying that darker skinned people were animals, that they were not fully human, and therefore could sustain extreme levels of torture. And also that it would be okay if lighter skinned people enacted that torture in order to get labor. Think about what I'm saying here, my friends. This is still a problem that we are dealing with in the medical community today, that even though it is obviously not part of science, still there are doctors who walk around with the belief that Black people can sustain more pain. This is part of why they were not as affected by the opioid epidemic. That's one tiny, tiny little good thing that came out of this. But it's because doctors don't prescribe pain medications to people of color. Now, why am I talking about this? Because we have to get hold of the big picture in order to even think about how speciesism is always at the shadow, at the edge of the conversation about diet culture. Now, of course, it's possible to focus on specific issues related to diet culture. But when we get things too far narrowed down to simple choice about what to consume, we are in danger of applying a neoliberal lens that does not care about racism or classism, but just about how the market can respond to individual desire and how individuals are supposed to be the ones to take responsibility for their health, despite things like fat stigma and racism and classism. I know this is complex, some of what I'm saying. Just let it wash over you for a few more moments if you're lost. I also want to say, sometimes the argument for no, don't talk about animal cruelty as well is that poor people are just trying to get by. And sure, eating the dollar hamburger at McDonald's might involve some animal cruelty, but they need the dollar burger. They need it. I think this is also unfair to say that poor people cannot care about animal cruelty because they're just so focused on getting by. People have a range of interests, and animal cruelty for instance, involved in factory milk production, or the level of pesticides used on crops sold at places like 99-cent stores as opposed to supermarkets. These things are of interest to poor people. They're of interest to people who, anybody who cares to think about these things. So the full range of issues influencing food production, I think it makes sense for these to be at play intersectionally as we consider diet culture. Not always in the center of the discussion, but intersectionally for sure. Okay, now, I think there's another way to look at this, which has to do with moral decision making and the ability to extend compassion toward ourselves. So the article that I'm offering you about the meat paradox, what the meat paradox reveals about moral decision making. My friends, that's going to take you in another direction about this topic if you would like to go there and read that on your own. But I'm going to comment a little bit about how this relates back to the compassion that we are capable of extending to ourselves as we grapple with the way that diet industry affects our well-being, right? So have you noticed that we often get left out when we try to offer compassion, right? That is, we don't offer it to ourselves. We have plenty of practice at withholding and upholding various oxymorons. And perhaps this is one of them, that if we fail to see ourselves as animals, if we fail to see ourselves, a lot of times when people talk about like, well, I don't know, like, why do we eat cows but not cats? It's like, well, but cats and dogs, they relate to us and they're intelligent animals. Well, there's plenty of evidence that shows that pigs are actually more intelligent than cats and dogs. But the bigger question still is, why are we holding intelligence up as the reason not to harm or eat something, as opposed to sentience? The idea that something is alive much as we are alive as part of the natural world. So there's a cognitive dissonance in meat eating that causes us to question our very ability to be good people. And this is a cultural norm that contributes to a great amount of cruelty, especially in this current factory-driven food model. And it's cruelty to both humans and animals. So listen, I'm not trying to say you're a bad person for eating meat, right? Like, all of us are participating in the pain and destruction of other things. Even if you choose not to eat meat, there are still things you're doing. So it's not so much that as it is that I'm asking you to question the cognitive dissonance involved in saying it's okay to harm some beings but not others. Because ultimately what this might come back around to is it okay for you to harm you? And let me be clear, I do think about the intentional deprivation of food when you are hungry. That is another definition of dieting. I do think of that as violence toward ourselves. The intentional deprivation of food when we are hungry. So I leave this question to you now. Is it relevant to talk about animal cruelty when we're discussing diet culture? And I wonder if you have answers of your own or questions for me about anything that I have offered. And I see that somebody has offered a book here in the chat. The book Afroism, Essays Addressing these and other intersections. So veganism, racism, feminism. Brilliant. I don't know this book, but I would love to have a look. And you have given us authors, Sil and Af Ko. K-O is the last name there.
I do have a comment.
Yes.
So going back to what you said with how diet has to evolve back with racism, and we were talking about that a few minutes ago. Not only that, but I feel like a lot of people who are, how would you say, poor, there was another word, poor, that aren't able to have options to healthier food, like for example, EBT. If for those who are not familiar with that, they give you a certain amount of money depending on how many children you have. And I mean, it doesn't give you the availability to actually buy organic produce or vegan produce, because if you think about it, that produce is very expensive. I know it because I purchase it. And if you buy a few little items, it's expensive. So it's more affordable to go to the 99-cent store or to an unhealthy food store and buy top ramen than get your healthy organic vegetables.
Yeah.
They leave us no option.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they leave limited options, and it sounds like you're already making some of those choices. But this is precisely the reason why these conversations are related to poverty and how people are, because a lot of times people act like well, being vegan or is some kind of like it's only available to the rich, but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. And culturally speaking, there's a lot of folks who, depending on if you come from a beans and rice culture, it is definitely a little bit easier to bring in additional produce. This also matters, like, are there viable places to grow produce in your communities? Are there people doing that and offering that? And largely what you're saying is so true. The answer is no. The answer is no, these things are not available except at a premium cost. So I don't have an answer to this, but I think this is a big part of why these conversations have to be part of the discussion, when we discuss diet culture and food availability as a whole. Anything else about this topic? I know it's complex, but really the question is just, when you're in a conversation about diet culture, sometimes it is appropriate to focus small. Sometimes it is appropriate to look at all of these varying intersections. And animal cruelty is one of them, particularly as it relates back to the speciesism that we have all become so comfortable with, that we as a culture have actually excluded certain human beings from our species in the past, and that still is affecting the culture we create today.
It seems like there's another way in, or another way to make that connection, and that for me is like, if you're like, in my life, the people that I've known who've been putting themselves on a lot of diets tend to be the people who have more wealth and privilege. So that, like, the same people who feel free to tell me that I'm doing eating wrong are the same people who might also tell me I'm doing eating wrong, because, for example, I was just having a conversation actually with my sister the other day, and she's like, what do you want me to buy at the store? She's rich. I'm staying in her house right now. And sometimes I said to her, I sometimes don't even know, because I don't shop by what looks good. I look at the price first. And I'm in the process of training myself away from that, because now I actually, for the first time in my life, do have enough money to buy whatever I want to eat within reason.
Right.
So there's a way in which the whole, the privilege of being even able to have a conversation about animal cruelty is tied to having money, because I'm in fucking the Bay Area or Sonoma County, and like one meal's worth of red meat could cost $45 in a restaurant, $25 at the grocery store, or $3.99 at Taco Bell. So
here's
please don't talk to me about animal cruelty. I mean, this isn't really me saying this, but like,
yeah,
I'm hungry,
listen,
I want meat, I'm going to Taco Bell.
And you can do that,
yeah,
and still talk about animal cruelty. And this is the thing that I am suggesting to you during our time together today, is don't let the limitations, don't let all of these categories limit what you can care about, even as you make the choice to eat at Taco Bell, because that is your best economic choice right now. We still can be interested in a wide variety of themes that support this topic. And indeed, if we fail to be interested in them, we are missing avenues for our betterment.
yeah.
So one of the things that strikes me in what you just discussed is the idea of moralizing food. And this is a huge element of diet culture that we have become very comfortable with as a culture, right? Moralizing which food you're going to have or not have. And for some people, it's even to the thing about, if you bought the ramen, that is a superior choice because it's not wasting money. But really, what if we stopped moralizing food choices entirely and started actually just looking at the issues that affect how food is produced in the US? And then that becomes a social discussion rather than a personal one that's like, I'm going to hell if I, don't eat enough vegetables, or if I eat too many expensive snacks, or if I whatever, fill in the blank. So the fact that we are so comfortable with food moralizing distracts us from the actual issues that we could care about, which have to do with environmentalism and cruelty and self-compassion and labor practices in farming. And, these are the things that actually we could stand to look at as a culture. And, and poverty, like, why the devil do we have rampant poverty in such a wealthy nation? Like, if we can produce a billionaire, even just one, then surely there should not be the kind of poverty. But because moralizing our choices is so comfortable, it ends up over and over again back to, well, you should have had the ramen instead of getting the coffee at Starbucks, shouldn't you? So these things are bound, these topics are bound in very complex ways. Any other comments on this before I move on to our second topic today? I'm going to move on to our second topic today, which, is always weirdly just a little bit related to the first. So the second topic today has to do with, here's how the question came up. Wait a minute, how is yoga good, but wellness culture is bad? And I thought about that. I thought about that question for a little while, going, is this the way to frame this? Yeah, let me just bring the actual question forward. But let me remind you that we're not just talking about yoga. We're talking about individual practices that lead to wellness, but also have an identity sort of their own. Yeah. Because let me just remind you all that with yoga, as an example, right? Yoga, the ancient Hindus did not care about your wellness. They cared about inner peace. And they cared about, that's a different aim than, this modern idea of of wellness. So hey, let's talk about this, which means we have to talk about cultural appropriation. So what is cultural appropriation? Well, that is a form of colonialism, right? Where one group of people feels entitled to first subjugate another group of people, make them less than, and then take whatever practices those people may have invented or created or evolved within their cultures, and sort of cherry pick them and take them as you wish, right? So it might be something like wearing a bindi in the middle of your forehead without understanding what it means to have a mark on your forehead in the culture from which that practice came. That is cultural appropriation. Now, is it cultural appropriation if you have learned about the culture and you are using that mark appropriately, and you are in the company of other people from that culture who are you're sharing your cultures with, and you are dressed as they are dressed? That is not cultural appropriation, my friends. That is a sharing of cultures, and you are equals in that endeavor. Like, it is a beautiful thing that we learn to appreciate and share culture with one another. But cultural appropriation specifically involves one culture being made less than first, and then the other taking, extracting from it. So cultural appropriation, we have to talk about that in order to talk about wellness culture. Because there is this idea that wellness, much like diet culture, wellness is this state out there that you can choose to be in, and it is divorced from social circumstances like poverty, like fat stigma, like racism and classism, and that somehow you can choose to be well through your practices, through your positive thinking alone. So, there's another term that is relevant here called spiritual bypassing. That is where you just sort of bypass the idea that a practice like yoga comes with its own spirituality, and that you are just going to charge past this in order to appropriate what you want to take, and then in order to ignore all of those cultural things that that influence a person's actual wellness. So, I talk a lot about, because this is the part where personal choice and responsibility take a neoliberal turn. And it becomes like magical thinking about the individual control that we have over our health. No, our health is actually related to a whole lot of social factors. Chief among them, how do other people see and understand my appearance, my identity, right? Because if somebody thinks that I am stupid and fat and lazy, and lazy slob because I'm fat, that is going to have an effect on my overall health and well-being. Racism and classism, all of these things. So this magical thinking that I have individual control, like, yes, through body positivity alone, I can make other people love me enough to pay me what my work is worth, or, it's ridiculous when you really think through this. So I just want to just pause for a moment and say, neoliberalism, I want to define this word a little bit. This perspective, neoliberalism, it sees people as consumers and basically as competitive. And though not all scholars agree on, the philosophical definition of neoliberalism, basically, it's that society's political and economic institutions should be liberal and capitalist, but also supplemented by, a constitutionally limited democracy and a modest welfare state. Like, we don't need to take very good care of others because their choices really are driving their well-being, not external factors. So yeah, people become personally responsible for their own treatment by their culture under a neoliberal banner. So they become personally responsible for their own health and housing and ability to advance financially or intellectually. The focus becomes on competition from the individual rather than better conditions in which to live. So all of this makes sense when we start to talk about how consumerism will lead to self-care. That is a neoliberal view. And I just want to say it is possible to think about self-care and wellness differently. Audre Lorde, for example, talked a lot about self-care and about how the conditions of sexism and racism in America required specific care for the Black female body. This is a politicized version of the idea of self-care, and it is far more useful to my mind. And again, people can have varying opinions, but what I don't want you to allow in your civil conversations that you have with others is the idea that the only form of self-care has to do with taking the afternoon off work and running yourself a bath and using a certain bath bomb and drinking a certain kind of tea and having somebody massage your toes. That is self-care as consumerism. Yeah. So here we go. There's a direct path from the cultural appropriation of wellness culture to the fascist and science-denying views of current conspiracy theorists. There, I said it. These things are related. The idea of take a little of this and take a little of that and, you know, become an expert after your weekend workshop and then, you know, move on and teach about that thing, that comes straight out of colonialism, straight out. No? So wellness to white supremacy pipeline is founded on the fetishization of the other and appropriating and stripping spiritual practices from exoticized others and then marketing them to white folks. This is what we're talking about in wellness culture. Making them about productivity and monetizing them. So do you notice this, that so much about the wellness industry is supposed to make you feel both rested and productive at the same time? So many of those messages are pointed in that direction. I mean, think about that. That is a complete mashup and redesign of whatever yogis or meditation teachers had in mind when they asked you to sit down and breathe. Like, that ain't it. But this is what we have made of wellness culture because it comes from colonialism and white supremacy. So wellness in this context has been turned into an identity politics exercise, a very white and racist one, replacing spirituality with capitalism and choosing what we highlight about who you can be if you do these things. So who you can be is like super productive and super well loved and super rested and super good at all the things you value. You know? So it's no accident that so much of that industry is focused on rest and productivity together. Kind of like how we want to look fit, which means slender, but we talk about how we really want health and wellness, you know, because your fitness actually is supposed to seem effortless. And you're supposed to want, you know, health and vitality. That's popular. So I'm going to give you just a couple of examples because I know this is, you know, when we get too abstract, it's a little like word salad. But honestly, I hope that you latch onto enough of these things that you think about them further, and then have the conversations that will flesh out your, your thinking. So I spent time recently in Palm Springs and taking care of my mother, her affairs. It's where she lives, and there's a business there. I happen to like eating organic vegan food when I have the opportunity, and there is a restaurant called Tanya's Vegan Kitchen, Tanya's Organic Kitchen. Oh, it's Tanya in any case. It's a nice little restaurant. It was very good food, but they have a motto that is on the t-shirts that the staff are wearing. And apparently it used to be painted on the wall, because when I questioned it, I was told that they were backing off of that motto just a little bit, but not so much that it's not still on their shirts. The motto was, eat plants, look good in your pants. Think about what that means for a moment. First of all, that you can't possibly be fat and vegan, and that fatness is going to make you look bad in your clothes. I mean, because otherwise, if it's not about fatness, why the devil would eating plants make you look good in your pants? Like, we all understand, without it even being spelled out, the association that we are supposed to make there. Yeah. But obviously the benefits of eating vegan are, could be conceived of as completely different, completely other than that, right? Like, you could be talking about, oh, this is not primarily about the way my body looks. It's about the world around you and how you interact with it ethically while benefiting your body. And some of the things we talked about on the last topic might be at play here. So this is an example of neoliberal wellness culture. Eat plants, look good in your pants. And of course I said, I went and said to the person, I love the food here, but that is fat hating nonsense, that logo, and you need to ditch it, my friends. So here's another example. Yoga being more about the internal pursuit of peace and nonviolence than about external appearances. And yet people talk about getting a yoga butt, getting breath of fire abs, right? So, the whole pursuit of like being fit and living long and having great skin, that's not actually what yoga was originally about. So one after another, these practices, as we do them in our Western cultures, become about white supremacy and neoliberalism. So yeah, going back to understanding the culture and its embedded practice is a great idea. And also questioning how we feel entitled to pluck everything we like from its original context and then claim to understand it. That's paramount. And I'll just share one more. There's an article for you for this topic, but then there's also a link of a friend and colleague of mine, Susanna Barkataki. She is a British Indian woman who teaches about honoring yoga's roots, and a lot about like how do you still be a great like a yoga practitioner that loves the practice and pays attention to, not being culturally appropriative in the process. So I love there's some discussion in the chat happening here. That the article I offered you is called Wellness Industry Issues Perfectionism. And somebody has commented here that, the title is powerful. And wait, apple bottom jeans look good on fat people. So fat bottoms and pants can look good, plants or not. Yeah. This is it's flawed, right? But that kind of eat plants look good in your pants logo, it knows what you assume already. Like, that is a logo. It doesn't work unless you already assume fat people are ugly And it is not possible to be fat and vegan, that somehow those things are going to be mutually exclusive. And obviously, both of those assumptions are nonsense. So, are there questions or comments about this topic related to wellness culture? Like, how is wellness culture problematic, but something like yoga or Tai Chi can still be great?
I just have a little, I guess, personal relationship with that, being a yoga teacher and having worked in a gym. And, you know, this concept that I was only allowed to teach the beginner class because I'm bigger and heavier. And just when people would come, if I would sub a class, they'd come in and look at me. And you write about this in your book, which I love. It's like, oh, thank you for saying that. Thank you so much. But just this experience, and I've, you know, actually turned down my light and just decided not to work in these places, in these facilities, because I don't want to deal with the constant judgment of the look, which you describe also really brilliantly. The look of, now who are you? Now how could you possibly teach me anything? You know,
Exactly.
wow, that's just, could you close your eyes and just listen, and maybe you'll learn something. It's fascinating. So just, I resonate with a lot of the things you're sharing, and they're on my mind as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And you're referencing my book, Fat, Pretty, and Soon to Be Old. And there are a number of yoga stories in there, because I'm also a yoga teacher. And yeah, the idea that the fat yogi does not have anything to offer the students comes from wellness culture, not from the practice of yoga as it is historically and culturally situated. Because as it is historically and culturally situated, it is a practice about inner peace. It's not about whether or not you can you know, do a perfect drop back bend, or you can do some kind of you know, thing that looks like a pretzel with your body. And I love yoga poses. It's not, you know, you don't have to be like against the poses in order to refocus what the purpose of the practice is back to its original cultural context. Beautiful. Thank you for those comments.
I did have
Folks,
a comment as well.
Please.
So I think I agree with what you're saying. In fact, I'm learning more about this, but I feel like in today's society, especially with younger women, there's a lot of body dysmorphia going on because people keep confusing wellness, your health, with looking slim and looking skinny. That's not the whole point. You can be skinny and be diabetic. You can be skinny and have cancer. It's either way. And that's what bothers me personally, because I'm a big girl and I'm not ashamed about it. And it took me a while to accept that, because I'm like, wait a minute, I'm big, like I need to lose weight. I'm not healthy because I'm big, I'm not healthy. I'm like, no, I'm not diabetic. I don't have any health issues. I'm like, I'm okay. And then I started learning as well too, because I don't know if people believe in this, but there's such thing as body complex as well. I mean, a lot of people in my family are big as well, and we're healthy, we're good people. And sometimes that's very common in families where their body complex is you're thick or you're thin, and there's nothing to be ashamed about it. And I feel like, especially in today's society, women, young women need to talk about that, need to be educated in that. I have a couple of girlfriends who hit the gym like 24/7 saying, oh my gosh, I need to be skinny. I need to do this. Like, oh my God, look at this. And I'm like, no, you're healthy, right? You're good. Like, I'm like, you need to get help, because mentally that's not okay. You need to accept yourself as well. I know I have my issues too. I'm not very confident with myself at times, but yeah, that's not okay. I feel like I totally agree with you. People are like switching up what it is to be healthy and all of these things. I like to see bigger women in like bikinis and things like that, because it's like, well, they can too, so can I. And you don't just have to be skinny in order to be healthy and things like that.
That's right. I think you're spot on, Samantha, and that sometimes the pursuit of what we call health, but is really body conformity, sometimes that pursuit leads to a lack of health. And so, yeah, we've got to be super careful. Great examples. Folks, you're still welcome to say something more, but I'm going to just ask you the question that I always ask, which is, do you think that there are opportunities coming up where you might be able to discuss some of these topics? Now, I realize both of these are rather specialized topics today, so it might not be the case, but if the opportunity arises, what I'm prompting you to do is to actually practice in your mind having a conversation that is civil and useful. So does anybody want to share about a place they think they will talk about these topics in the, as time goes on? Or if you have other questions, we'll entertain them in these last few minutes.
I mean, I have like an entire branch of my family that are in like a multi-level marketing, like I think it used to be called OptiFast and now it's called something else. And like one of them makes shit tons of money off of it. But anyway, their whole thing is called like Healthy You. Basically, it's like they're all obsessed with being skinny.
Mm-hmm.
And oh yeah, they call it the program. It's just, anyway, I had lunch with them last month in Connecticut. I love them. They're my beloved, beloved cousins. And they're just like obsessively dieting all the time and then making money off selling it to other. Anyway, to answer your question, there's not a way for me to talk about it with them. So I just don't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like the conversation would be pointless because of how invested they are in their own viewpoints? Or do you feel like it would just be upsetting to you?
I actually think that it wouldn't be upsetting to me per se. Is that true?
Mm-hmm.
No, it's just kind of like, why would I be having it? Like, I'm not going to change, for the most part, like they're good family members, I guess. They're like good liberal Jews, our politics align, so like.
So let me just
I don't
suggest
know.
that
Please.
if you come to a place where you are saying to yourself, I wouldn't talk to these people about this because it would either be upsetting to me or it would be pointless. If these are topics that you care about, however, there are civil ways into these kind of conversations. And it can start as simply as, I just read this fascinating article, or I just listened to this interesting episode of the Hope Desk, or I just fill in the blank, whatever thing has influenced you to have a viewpoint on the topic. That is your introduction. And folks, I just want to suggest to you, you're not picking a fight. That's the thing we're not doing, right? You're not trying to pick a fight with somebody. But if one of these topics, if you find that it lingers in your mind, that it is somehow important to you or to your values, then find ways to talk to people, whether it's your beloved cousins or whether it's your grocer or whether it's your chiropractor or whether it's, find ways to talk about the things that affect you and the things that impassion you. That's it. And how we do that, because we are so out of practice, is by practicing in our heads and coming up with those opening lines like, I just read this interesting thing and I'm interested what you think about it, given the fact that you sell this product. There's a big difference between that and trying to pick a fight with somebody because you know better. And that is what I hope that I hope that I am not fueling that fire in anyone.
Yeah.
Through these monthly discussions. It's brilliant that you have been here today with me, and I'm just looking at the chat to see if there's anything else I want to bring forward. Someone says, thank you for all I do. Thank you. That my book is helping her to regulate and draw from inner power to fight the system. That's what I'm here for. And also someone else says, I get worn out when people of all ages try to exchange activity for eating what they want or judge those who eat more for eating too much. It is exhausting. It's exhausting, and it You know, I often just toss out a little line when somebody says something like, "Oh, well, I ran an extra mile this morning so I could have dessert." You know, I sometimes just toss out a little, "Oh, you are worthy of dessert no matter what." And that's not the beginning of a conversation, but it is at least an interruption of a train on the track that everyone else in the room thinks they understand, right? And so it's a little stop, think it through. And then, you know, that train probably is going to continue on the track for that person, but for everyone else in the room, at least there's been a little interruption. So yeah, these topics sometimes are exhausting, but I have faith in you. You can keep up the good work. And I will see you all next on May 3rd. Thanks so much for coming, and thank you, Emily, for guiding our technology.